Hello and welcome back to the studio. Well, as you can see, I've been having a bit more fun with my paintings. This time, well, I've been mucking around with some old palettes here and doing a little bit of an outline with a pencil and then taping off a section just for something a little bit different. I want to do a painting inside the cutout of a palette. Now, this is the last painting before Christmas 2024, and God, it's very seasonal outside. That's right, grey, wet, miserable, blowing a gale. So I think I'll do something completely spring-like, just to give us a little bit of a burst of what's ahead of us in the seasons. It won't be long before it's solstice, and it'll be the shortest day and then the longest night, and it will quickly flip. And next thing you know, it will be springtime. So what am I going to do today? Well, this is one of the questions I've been asked recently. Can I paint in water mixable oils? So I thought, well, New Year's resolutions on the horizon, and lots of you are going to start painting, and you probably want to know if you can, because maybe you just don't have the sort of space or facilities for sort of thinners and stuff, and maybe you're working in a flat or an apartment where you just can't have that sort of chemical about. So I'm going to be painting today with water mixable oils. Now, it doesn't matter what brand you use. Just pick a brand which you've got locally available to you. And remember, these are water mixable oils, not water soluble. So they still are oil paints. They dry slowly. And if you get some on your hands, well, you can leave a calling card on your clothing just as easily. But let's get started, because we need to do a little bit of prep. This is a springtime painting, inspired one of Bob's ones, but well, with a bit more of a twist to the English countryside. Here's my canvas. Again, I painted this with some grey gesso, left it to dry. This is made of paper. This is one of my practice canvases. It had 2 coats of gesso, been left to dry completely. It's been taped to an old canvas, so I still have that nice bounce. The bounce is important because I want my paints to be sort of not painting on really hard sort of surface. I want to be able to touch with my brush and have a little bit of give. It'll give you a much softer touch. Now let's have a quick look at the painting that inspired this. Is one called Countryside Oval. It's one by Bob Ross, and it's also inspired by a very local view. I'll try and find a photograph, and if I can, I'll bring it up on the screen for you. And this is off of a road called Long Furlong. It's just a few miles from where we live, and it's a big wide view right across a valley into the far distance. And that's what I want for my scene. I want to look off into the distance. Those observant ones amongst you will have spotted I put in a couple of these things. These are map pins. You buy them from a stationer's shop. And I've set these towards the top end. Can't find that one now. I've set these towards the top half of my painting. Now, ignore all this nonsense here. This is just a bit of fun. But here's my horizon line. I want to look way off into the distance. Now, as I mentioned in the intro, this is all going to be painted with water mixable oils. So, and the brand I'm going to be using is Winsor, but you use whatever brand you have available. And notice it's water mixable oil colour medium. The reason why is because I want to do this exactly the same style as I would do if I were painting a Bob Ross painting, which is wet oil on wet oil. The only problem is we don't have some of the products, one of them being liquid white. So I need to get around that problem. And what I've got here is a little drop of my linseed oil and a synthetic brush. Now, I'm going to start off by just using a little drop on my brush and just scrubbing on a very thin coat. Now, as I'm painting, I'll chat to you about the different techniques that you're going to come across. Now, as anybody who's watched any of my paintings know, I'm a huge Bob Ross fan and love Bob's work to bits. He's inspired me to paint so many things. I can't thank Bob and the Bob Ross company enough. But times move on and people don't always have access to those materials. And I found myself in the same sort of position during lockdown, during COVID. We weren't allowed to go anywhere, couldn't get out of the house, and I couldn't get hold of any paint. So I ordered up some water mixable oils, as a stopgap, just to get me over that hump. So this is what this is intended to do. It's intended to appeal to you if you're in one of those positions where you can't get hold of the Bob Ross products, or they're just not good for your home environment. Now, it's important that you put on just a very, very thin amount of this. Now, it's easy to overdo it. You can really end up swamping your canvas with this linseed oil. So I'm going to say be very careful not to overdo it. In fact, you want to give your brush a nice dry clean, because all that linseed oil is going to come out all over your painting. What I like to do is just to gently blot this off. Now, I'm not scrubbing it, just giving it a little bit of a blot. I'm checking from the side. I'm sort of ducking my head down below the canvas. Whoops, trying to do that without falling on the floor. I can see there's a couple of little dry spots there. Just give that a little rub. Now then, this has got a very, very thin coat of linseed oil. Now, if I was doing this as a painting which didn't require any other colours, I could treat this as though it had been covered with something like liquid clear. But I actually want this to be pastel. So here's my liquid water mixable oil paint. I was trying to make an escape. And I'm going to use this brush. I just dry cleaned it, and I'm going to go straight into some water mixable titanium white oil paint. And I'm going to cover my canvas with a thin, even coat. I'm going to scrub this in. So I've got that nice sort of white oil-based mixture. Now, take a careful look. Notice it doesn't have quite that same depth of white that Bob Ross liquid white has. So there are differences. You can work with them. But as you can see, if I put on too much of that linseed oil, this will become almost completely wishy-washy and transparent. In fact, it's probably just almost too wet. But it's okay. I'm sure I can work with it. So there's my canvas, nicely prepared. And again, I can do my little fingertip check. I touch the canvas with a fingertip and have a quick look. And what I'm looking for is a nice clear fingerprint. It's a little on the oily side, but there's enough white there. Now, if this needed to be whiter or more dense, you could add a little bit more titanium white to your painting, and you could make it look dense. So the choice is yours with this sort of stage, but I definitely don't want to see too much of my grey canvas peeking through. So it's a little bit of an experiment for us, isn't it? So there we go. I think I am about right for my painting. Let's start adding some colour. So let's have a look at my palette. As you've already seen, titanium white. I've got some cerulean blue for my sky, some black, burnt sienna, alizarin crimson, sap green, cad yellow, and some yellow ochre. And most of these colours are the ones I would use if I were doing this with the Bob Ross technique. So maybe there's some small variations, but basically these are the same sort of colours I would use. And as I want this to be sort of a nice, easy beginner sort of painting, I'm just going to stick to using these few colours here. So the first thing I want to do is paint a nice blue sky. And I want to use this brush again, because it's got a lot of titanium white in it. So I'm going to give that a quick dry clean on a paper towel to get off some of that paint. And I'm going to pull down my paint. Now, what you will find is that these colours, straight out the tube, even though there's a little bit of oil dripping from them, are firm and dry. And we'll talk a bit more about the consistency of the paint later on, because it makes a big difference. And as always, I'm going to start up in the top corners. Well, there isn't a corner here, is there? But do you know what I mean? I'm going to start at the top of my canvas, and I'm going to do little crisscrosses down. Now, as I come down to the horizon line, you see my colour already wants to fade. And that's okay, because the top corners of the sky are usually stronger. Next time we have a sunny day, which may be some weeks away yet, go outside and have a look at the sky directly above you. Lean right back, fall over, and look at the sky directly above you. And you'll notice just how strong and blue that colour is. It can be almost navy blue. And then let your eyes fall to the horizon line, and you will be amazed at just how much that sky fades to almost nothing. Now, I want some nice big fluffy clouds on my canvas here. So if you leave a few little light patches in here, that's a little bit of a help, isn't it? Behind where I want those big fluffy clouds, to make them sharp, I need a good strong blue colour. So don't let this get too faded at the background here. My canvas has taken nearly all of my blue colour. On the other side of Long Fernal, there's a place called Clapham Ponds, and I'm going to pull in some blue colour there because those ponds feature, and they're just sort of off to the right hand side of my scene. So I'm going to pull in some of that nice blue colour. It's time to make those lovely fluffy clouds. I've got a fan brush. Now, sometimes I use a synthetic fan brush, or I use one of my very old bristle brushes. But again, I don't use my Bob Ross branded brushes. They don't like to go into water, but these old crusty ones are quite good. I'm going to add a little bit of that titanium white paint. Now, if you want to add a little bit of a shadow colour to it, you can add a tiny touch of black. But I'm going to go into just straight white. Now, think about your cloud shape, and if you want, you can almost sort of see a cloud shape on there. You can sort of sketch this onto the background of your painting. So you can sort of draw out what you want on your painting actually before you even begin. And if you're a beginner, and as I say, this might well be one of your first oil paintings, then it's probably a good idea to do things like that. Give yourself a few little sort of hints and pointers as to where you might be painting. Now, I've got that lovely patch in there, and that's what I'm going to follow. And the technique I'm going to be doing is making little letters C's. C with the corner of my fan brush. Just touch and make a little curl. And I'm following that sort of patch there. I quite like some of those other little touches of light in the background. Notice little letter C shapes. The trick is just to do the outside edge first. What I'm looking for here is what they call the silver lining. Notice I use a little bit of pressure. I kind of press into the canvas, squeeze out some of that paint. And you don't have to be too sort of careful with this. You can just kind of get it to go on there any which way you like. And if you get the odd sort of broken edge there, they can be quite fun, can't they? You can get some really kind of nice looking edges in here. This brush has still got a bit of blue on it, and then once again, dry clean it really good. Because I'm going to be using just a few little hairs on the corner. Now, this is quite a stiff synthetic brush, and if it's too stiff, it might take off a bit too much of this paint. But I'm going to be using just a few little hairs right on the corner there. And what I want to do is I want to touch, I want to go up into the cloud, pick up a little of that paint and then bring it down. So what I'm doing is I'm sort of pulling the paint away from the silver lining and just tapping in sort of the middle of my cloud. Now you see that some of this grey blue colour underneath sort of shines through. So by doing this, I'm creating sort of a nice sort of depth in my clouds. I'm sort of creating sort of a 3D effect. You see that little piece of grey through there, the blue-grey colour? Don't cover that up. That's your best friend. This will give your clouds a real sense of depth. Just tap, just little letter C's again. Once you've done this stage, if you want to go back in and add another layer of cloud, you can. I think I can put in another little cloud in there. Try not to follow that previous line too much. It can look like they're sort of almost copies of each other, so throw in a few differences as well. and bring it forward. Let's do that. Let's borrow this. Imagine that line comes along there and joins there. Look at that. I moved this cloud back and brought this whole bank of clouds forwards. Again, from experience, I found if I sit and mess around with my paintings too much, I tend to undo more than I create in the end. And I kind of look back and think, wish I just left that little bit alone. I'm just sort of getting rid of a few little edges here, which I'm not keen on. But truth be told, I probably paint better clouds quickly than I do by sort of sitting on them for too long. And now I want to use the side of my brush, very soft and smooth, fingertips only. I want to just gently brush across my cloud. This just knocks off any really high spots of paint. Barely touching here. You're going to get your little wispy up there. Get that. There you go, gone. And this is another reason why I like to use a canvas with a bit of bounce so that I can't touch too hard. I think it's a background sky. I like it. Now let's put in some distant hills. A lovely valley into the distance. And all of those sort of fields in the background there are all a very, very long way away. Notice how pale they are. They don't have a great deal of colour. Things that are far off in the distance tend to be very pale and low in detail. So I want a nice sort of pale green colour to indicate some distance. I've got some sap green, a little touch of cad yellow, and maybe a little touch of blue, but predominantly white. Now, again, I'm going to be using a little flat brush for this. It's a small painting, so I don't need a big 1-inch brush. Go for some sap green, little touch of white. Build that up a little tiny bit, and I'll put in a little bit of yellow. That always gives a nice sort of limey effect to a field. If you want to change the value a little bit more, you can put a little bit of blue at the other end there. So you see we've got a nice sort of what I call a kaleidoscope of colours. I've got a blue-green colour here, a nice yellow-green colour here, and a nice sort of pale green in the centre. And I want to just press my brush into this paint. And as you see I do that, see what happens. I drive the paint ahead of the bristles. Now, we know the horizon line somewhere along that line, and it doesn't have to be perfectly straight. It can have humps and bumps in it. So what I'm going to do is here, I'm going to just come in and just tap, get my initial sort of lines done. Now, obviously, those lovely clouds are going to have some effect because they're white, and that white paint is going to make this colour a little on the pale side. So as I put a little bit of that into there, maybe it wants to be a little stronger. We know we can add a little touch of blue-green. Make a stronger green colour. And I'm going to have maybe a little stronger at the sides here. But I almost want this horizon line to look like it's almost the same colour as the background sky. I want this to look like it's a very long way away. Maybe a little bit more of a dip to it. I haven't quite figured out what we're doing on the side here. There's going to be a tree in here somewhere. This colour here. And of course, this canvas is wet, so it's picking up some colour here. More blue, more sap. You can see I can come in here, just drop in a slightly darker green colour. And you see by tapping this on, get this kind of nice texture. Now I'm looking at my painting, but just to the side of me here, there's a camera there, and it shows me what the colour looks like on your screen a little bit more. And this definitely looks a little bit on the sort of lime green end of things, so I'm going to darken it up just a touch more. And already you can start to see there's that progression from those very, very pale distant hilltops through to the slightly stronger colours in the foreground. And that's my green colour I'm using now. So quite a good strong green colour. Might even go a touch darker with a little bit of black. It's really quite shockingly green, doesn't it? It's really quite strong. Let's have a little test. Now, I mentioned I might have a little tree or two on the side here, so it's a good place to test. I think that's quite good. I think a little bit of time lapse here, and I'll work on here and start adding some little tree details in as well. As I work forward in my painting, notice how much darker the colours are getting. Here I've mixed some sap green with some burnt sienna, a touch of black. I want a really dark sort of earthy green colour, maybe even a touch of burnt sienna. Now I want to add 3 little trees to the background, but take care here. There's always a chance you might make them, well, look like little lollipops. That won't do, will it? Painted a few of those in the past, so as you paint these little characters, try and sort of think about getting a nice sort of shape to them. Here is number 1, and these friends. And I might come back and maybe play with them a little bit more to change the shapes. I'm going to bring this dark colour right the way down to the edge of the water. So there's the distant part of my painting all done. A nice, very pale, distant hillside, lots of lovely textures through here, a few nice changes of colour through to this foreground there, which is a nice dark colour. And as you saw me describing, I wanted some little trees here. I've got 3 of them. And I wanted to make sure they look like little individual characters. Now, as I stand back, they all look a little bit the same sort of size. So maybe I might join 1 or 2 of them together, so they don't look too symmetrical. There we go. So I push those 2 together and giving him a little bit more room there. Make these small adjustments on your own paintings. When you sort of stand back, you might think, I need to make a little tweak or a little change, since that just kind of changes the whole character of that little group of 3 trees there. It just means joining them up a little bit more. I'm going to make some bigger trees here on the right, but I do want to include a little bit of highlighting through here. And for that, I need a clean, dry brush. Now you'll find I use these smaller brushes on a smaller canvas. I could come through here with a big 1-inch brush, but then it kind of covers it all up really quickly. And what I like to try and do is to use maybe a smaller brush. Now, these colours that I've been applying here are the ones straight from the tube. This is an important point. These are firm and dry. These colours are what they call lean. They don't have a lot of oil in them. They're pretty dry, they're pretty sticky. And to make a highlight stick to this, it needs to be a little bit thinner and a little bit oilier. Okay, a little bit more fat. Fat oil. So sometimes you might see an expression called fat over lean. What this means is that fat, oily, thin paint will stick to a thick, dry, lean colour. Fat over lean. It means wet, oily paint onto a dry colour. Now, if I look at my palette, you see my cadmium yellow. It's pretty firm and dry, doesn't have a lot of oil in it. My sap green is a little more oily, but you can see that looks pretty dull, doesn't it? Pretty flat and matte. And if I go into that colour, I'm going to have trouble making that stick. I'm going to show you. If I touch that onto there, just go gently at this. You can see all I'm actually doing is picking up that dark green colour. I'm not actually getting anything to stick. To make it stick, I need to add a little bit of my oil. And I'm going to take just a tiny drop. Tiny little drop. Not too much. Add it into my highlight colour, cad yellow, sap green. And you see instantly it starts to have a slightly glossy look to it. Still needs to be a bit wetter than that. Take a little drop more and do this drop by drop. Don't add a ton of it because you'll end up with a real puddle. Now then, suddenly my paint has a glossy effect. And when I push my brush, it feels a little more soft and oily, a bit more creamy, a little bit more fat. Now then, let's try again. Remember, the light's coming this way. If I touch with that brush, you see, now I'm getting a little bit more paint to stick. Let's continue brightening up my colour. Yeah, sticking a little bit easier. Still a bit on the sticky side. Let's add a little touch more oil. And again, every time I add a little touch of oil, it gets easier and easier for my colours to stick. There you go. Now you can see how I've got a nice creamy colour there to work with. And again, don't overdo this, just add little touches of oil. And as you touch, work from the top, work down. You can lighten up your colour a little bit. You can add a little touch of white into it. Make it a little brighter. You can touch a little touch of ochre. Remember, every time you pull other colours into here, you might be making the paint a little firmer each time. So you have to keep balancing your colours out. But I think I got a nice sort of ochre kind of colour coming through here. Look at that. That little touch of white. So keep that one in mind when you're painting away. If a colour won't stick, remind yourself, fat, oily paint over lean, firm, dry paint. That's the rule. If you have a firm, dry base colour, then your oily, thin highlights will stick easily. Look at that lovely texture on there. It's a little bit stripy, but I don't mind too much. A little bit more green through there. Look at that. Your eye is taken right to that central area. Rather lovely now, isn't it? Very spring-like. So here's my little painting so far. And as you see, that wet on wet technique works just as well with water mixable oils. You just have to take a little bit of care when it comes to adding some of that linseed oil into the highlights. I did it drop by drop by drop until I got the paint just wet enough just to stick, without it really sort of going on there sort of too wet. You need the good dark textured colour first, and then a nice light oily colour for the highlights. Now, time to sort of bring our painting together a little bit more. As I mentioned, time for some of those reflections, and that's something that Bob was famous for. What a great technique. I've kept my blue brush to hand, and I'm going to give it a really good dry clean, because what I want to do is to grab a little bit of colour, pull it down, and then brush across. Nice dry clean, get off as much paint as you can. And what I want to do is grab just the tiniest little bit of this colour on the bank here. Just reach in, press firmly, and press and pull straight down. Now don't pull down too far, because this is only a little distant bank. I'll just grab a little bit of colour. If you think you're picking up a bit too much in a brush, just knock a little touch off. Try and make sure you pull straight down with this. If you start going across at some odd angles, well, it can make things look a little bit tricky. Now, somewhere in here is the thumb hole for my palette. I'm not sure if I want it or not. I might take it out. Now over here, I'm going to pull my colour down a little further. I want my paint to look like it sort of kind of curves around a little bit. It sort of draws your eye towards the distance, so your eye sort of taken back. There we go. See, so just changing the shape of the reflections alters your perception of depth and distance in a painting. Now, give my brush a nice dry clean. I'm going to just brush across edge to centre. Now, super light touch here. Edge to centre, and lift off with a little bit of a flourish. And you don't want to go across this too many times, because you'll end up making this very, very muddy. I think that looks rather nice. Now, I think I want a nice big tree on this right hand side and maybe a nice riverbank in through here. To balance my painting out a little more, what I want to do is maybe introduce this element over here on this near side that looks like it's on the near side bank here. We've got these three lovely trees over here on the left hand side, which gives that side of my painting a little bit of weight, a bit of attention. But I deliberately left this side, well, a little bit sort of unfinished. That's because I planned ahead a little bit to put in maybe a nice tree here and a nice bank through here. I'm still not convinced about the thumb hole bit. Let me get that for you. See, this bit, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I want that hole in my painting or not. I'm really undecided on that one. It may not get uncovered. It may just be painted over. I'm just not sure. But I do know I need to put some nice dark through here. And for that, of course, I'm going to be using more of this lovely dark green colour here, which was, again, some black, some cerulean blue. We can use that up. A good dollop of sap green, and, of course, some alizarin crimson. And that all goes to make a really strong green tone with a bit of an earthy brown touch to it. I might put a bit more sap into that. Again, this wants to be a nice, dry, firm colour. Don't add any of the oil to this. And again, I want to think about maybe having some nice bushes in here or a nice tree in here. But for the time being, all I want to do is here just to block this bit in, get a feel for things. Because you can't kind of imagine anything sometimes when you're just looking at this big white canvas or big pale canvas. You just can't see where you're going with it. And Bob was famous for blocking in his canvases quickly on camera because he didn't have a lot of time to do it. But the other reason why he would do it quite quickly is because it meant that you got a greater sense of proportion, of depth and colour, and it kind of let your eye sort of see the structure of a painting quite quickly. Now look at that. In the few minutes I've been blathering on and blather, that's a very English phrase or very Scottish phrase. Blathering is talking. In the time I've just spoken to you, I'm not going to worry about this bit because this is all tape. Just by doing that, in those few minutes, what I've done is I've added another layer of depth to my painting. I've pushed everything here further back. These trees are further back than they were just a few minutes ago. By adding successively darker layers into my painting, I'm adding more depth and distance. Killing off this area in the foreground here. Now I hope you can see that maybe there's a potential here. Maybe I can add in that nice bush. Maybe a nice tree here that I was thinking about. And that will sort of balance up my painting. The weight of those little trees in the background here and some weight in the foreground here with that lovely distant view to my scene. And this is how we plan painting sometimes, based upon photographs, or we sort of use a little bit of imagination. But I sort of decided before this painting was even begun that this was the sort of structure I was going to go for. So this isn't random, this isn't just a matter of chance. Now I hope you looked at my last little video, and I'll drop a link to it up there. It's all about what paintings need. They need focal points. And here I'm going to have more than one. A focal point here, a focal point here, and a focal point in the distance. So sometimes you can have more than one, you can have several, and it guides your eye through the painting to the distance. It would really make the difference, I suppose, if I had a little red tractor up there on the hillside. Maybe one sort of element too much there, but well, that would be what someone might do. Put something small red in the distance. So I stood back and had a look at my painting from the other side of the room, and I quite like the idea that these little bushes are going to grow up a little bit higher. I'm just going to use this little brush on edge, just these little pressing strokes, and create these delicate little shapes. Very reminiscent of the way Bob would use a 1-inch brush. And as you see, I've added a little bit more sap green into my colour, a little bit more of the cerulean blue colour. Well, it's just a slightly brighter, sparkly colour. This looked a little bit sort of too dull. What do I do about this bit? Well, I might do nothing about that bit. That's what I might actually do, because sometimes you actually don't want to finish out the paintings completely. You almost want the eye to sort of literally lose interest as it reaches that point. And what it does again is it draws your eye to the center. You really want to be looking here, not at these edges. So you want to make the edges less interesting, make this more interesting. Again, it's all about balance and focal points. Now, let's get on and put some nice highlights on here. With this brush, Early Bath, I think. Again, I'm just going to go through this paint, put in some nice colours in here. You can just see there's a little bit more of that linseed oil in there. Give your brush a little bit of a press. Again, I want to just kind of stipple up that paint a little bit. Okay, you see I'm pressing my brush into that paint. Get it nice and stippled. Okay, I pressed it in. I'm going to flip my brush up so you can see it's got like a nice rounded edge on it. And think about the light coming through here. Maybe some of these are in shadow, but I want this one to be, again, a nice focal point. I'm going to touch just above. Put a little highlight in there. Now, remember, this is the firm dry paint here. And if you press too hard, you're going to pick up all that green colour. So do the right side, which is brightest first, and as you run out of colour, start to add a little bit of the shadow colours in. Now you will pick up paint, and the way to combat that is to simply flick it off on a piece of paper towel, and then go back and reload again. And that way you always keep your brushes sort of fairly nice and neat. They won't cause you too many problems. And again, just touching gently, saving a little shadow in here and there. Now, there's always a chance that you could just put in every colour you have on your palette. Before I forget, I'll tell you this. So you end up with a yellow one, an ochre one, a green one, another yellow one, another ochre one. And it's lovely and it's great fun. And I've enjoyed doing that lots with my own paintings. But you can end up with something which looks like, well, like every toy in the toy box has come out to play, and it can just end up being a bit of a mishmash of colours, and it sort of lacks sort of any kind of unification. So try not to get every kind of colour you can imagine. A couple of little sparklers, a couple of little highlights, but don't mix every colour you've got, because you can just end up just overloading your painting with colour. This looks a little bit, I'm not quite so sure I like it. What do you think I should do, folks? Well, I tell you what I will do. Here we go. Pick up a palette knife, scrape off the highlight, because that's thin and oily. Stab in some of that nice dark green colour again. And have another go at highlighting. But you couldn't come back and have a little go at fixing it. There we go. I think that one fits in a bit better with the other colour scheme. I'll carry on adding some more highlights here. I'm going to keep this corner a little bit on the dark side. Before I move on to the next section of my painting, which is to start putting in sort of the framework almost, the tree on this right hand side, I take a moment just to look at my painting from the other side of the room, because if I'm going to be painting across this horizon line, which I probably will be, I want to make sure that I'm happy with everything back here in the distance, because by the time we start putting things across here like trees and things, it's going to be tricky to come back in here. And standing across the other side of the room, I can't help but feel that maybe the edge of this field is just a little bit lost. It's the colour is almost exactly the same colour as background cloud, and I want to just add a slightly better defined edge there, but not much. You just want to be just slightly more towards the grey side of things. So I've washed and dried my brushes completely. These are completely clean, and I gave that one a nice wash and let that one air dry as well. I don't want to use that one again, and I want to keep the other two for my tree. So I'm going to use one of these little flat brushes here, and I say what I'm really looking for here is just a little suggestion. It doesn't have to even be particularly much of anything, but just a slightly more grey-green colour there, I think, is what I'm looking for. So I've got a little bit of the sap green colour I had. Put some of that over to the side. Tiny touch of white. A little bit of more of the blue colour into it, and a little touch of black. Let's see if we can make a sort of a grey-green colour. So it's going to take a little bit more. So a quick look at that. Just offer up a little dab. See that? Just that tiny little difference there. Just a little grey-green colour. I see, I kind of blend my colours across the palette there. So I kind of start here with my darkest colours. And you see, I work my way away from it so that I can sort of work backwards and forwards in a little patch. I rarely, if ever, mix up a ball of paint unless I know, for instance, that I'm going to be doing maybe a lot of one colour. So, for instance, down here, I just want dark. Otherwise, I tend to sort of mix up my colours in sort of random sort of patterns so that I can dip into different areas of it. So here I'm going to go into a little bit more of that slightly more blacky green colour, so slightly dark. I put a little feature in there. And these little adjustments we make to our painting, I think are critical, really, because unless we look for these little details in our painting, we might do paintings which look a little bit bland, and they're just lacking something. And that last little painting I did was all about focal points, and I feel sometimes that if I stand back and I can't see a focal point, I need to find one. I need to put one in or invent one. And I think keep this all in mind when you're painting away sometimes, that, you know, try and put yourself in the shoes of the person that's looking at this painting for the very first time. What do they want to expect to see? What do you think it is that they might like to see in your painting? Because if you're not going to deliver on that front, then your painting won't have that kind of degree of interest that I think a painting really needs to sort of hold someone's attention. And what else could I do to my painting? What else could I add to my painting for a focal point? I might put in just a suggestion of maybe a few little grey-green trees back there. I think with that, I think I'm done with this. Oh, I've gone a little bit crazy dark there, but that's okay. Maybe that's good. Put that in. Looks like a little stones now, doesn't it? Looks like a little outcrop of rocks. Soften that up, push that back. There you go. So you look, just some small touches there, some small changes. Drop some fence posts in there, put a tree in over the side here. You can just keep playing with the scene. But yep, I do want to put in a nice little sort of suggestion of a little tree or a shrub here. Despite the fact I'm going to lose one of my favourite little bits of cloud, never mind, I can paint it again. For my background tree, I'm going to do it in slightly a strange order, because you see, I want the effect of light passing behind maybe a nice bush or a little sort of scrubby sort of tree here. And I want the light to look like it's sort of catching the branches as they sort of face out the back. So in other words, the bit that's closest to you is in shadow, and the bit behind it is actually in highlight. So it's a bit back to front. Normally you would put it on all the dark colour and then highlight on top. So I'm trying something different here. I'm really experimenting a little bit. I put out some fresh cad yellow. I got white, and I've got a little bit of yellow ochre. As we know, that is just straight out the tube, and it is a little bit flat. It needs a little bit more oil. So, and I'm going to use a fan brush for this. So I'll put a little bit of oil on a fan brush. And say this wants to be really quite bright, almost quite sparkly. A little bit of white into it. And maybe a little bit of that sap green colour. It's really super bright. I really like that. That's kind of the colour I'm going for here. Now, let's say think about the back edge of this, and I'm going to use just a fan brush here. Try not to lose that little feature there. So I'm kind of thinking about sort of keeping it to here, really. And because it's easy to run out of position, what I'm going to do is put on what I call some little markers. In other words, I know that's the boundary. I don't want to get any further across than that. And that's kind of a neat little trick, is if you can just put in these little markers like that. They don't have to be in a straight line, obviously, but they can keep you out of trouble. Trees at the back, I'll darken up my colour a little bit because that doesn't show up against the sky very well. So I put a little bit more yellow ochre into my colour. So down here this works well because it's against that dark green. To hold this all together, because it's just floating there, I'm going to be using a bit of the burnt sienna, a little drop of black into it to give me a very dark chocolate brown colour, and again a couple of drops of that linseed oil just to make it really thin and oily. Thin like ink, as Bob would say. I'm using a synthetic liner brush here, and I want to just put in just the indication of a few little branches, sticks and twigs, something sort of holding this all together so that it looks like it's sort of attached to something on the bank. With a nib, I keep my hand out of the way, you'll see what I mean, and just literally use the very, very last few hairs of my brush. Let's make sure these don't look too heavy. There we go, so you see just super fine branches, and I know people struggle with this. They just land a little bit heavy with their brush, but try practicing painting with just the very point of the brush. Just add a few little sticks and twigs in here, just again for just to sort of build this side up a little bit. Again, I'm going to use that fan brush. I gave it a bit of a dry clean. It's probably doesn't need to be very dark green, just darker green. So this is sort of closer to us in the scene. I have to put a bit more sap green out, I think. So this, I'm going to sort of try and fit this in around this highlight, and I've got some dark green here that I can borrow. Sorry folks, I am a bit gutted, if I'm honest. I forgot to hit record. I painted this little tree and I gave a little friend and then put some highlights on, blathering away to myself, and then I look my screen and realise the tiny little red button that says record was blank. What I did is I took some of my green colours in here and I dabbed in this lovely pale green colour, popped it in, and I went for a darker green colour. I just went back into my sap green, added a touch of black into it, and I created this lovely shadow colour in here. I just literally used the corner of my brush. I just pressed it in. Push, push, push. So I created 1, 2, 3 separate colours. Brighter, mid-green, dark green. And then on top of the dark green ones, I flipped my brush onto another corner and I went into my white, some of that green colour on it. And I just added in this little detail. I was thinking about the light coming past this tree, catching that little bright spring colour there, and adding just the suggestion of a highlight. So in that second, I created 1, 2, 3, 4 trees in that little section of my canvas. For once, my camera didn't take a tea break, but my brain did. What I was talking about was making things up as you go, painting stuff just sort of out of your head. And as I'm doing this, I'm reminded of a comment by one of you lovely subscribers, and she just sort of conveyed to me in her comments how lovely it was to be able to just pull 2 or 3 colours together, mix them up on her palette, and know in advance that it was going to be a colour that she wanted. And that sense of freedom that she was able to just mix a colour without panicking or worrying or being concerned that it was going to be the right colour. That because she had practiced and she had learned to trust her skills and her eyes, that now she was able to sort of accelerate her work and to actually do these things without sort of fear and worry that she was going to get things wrong. And for me, hearing that comment from her makes my heart leap, because this is what this is all about. Having fun, creating things without fear. Just thinking, well, I could just mix these colours up and I could make light, mid, dark, light combinations, and 3 little trees appear. So this is what I'm aiming for you when you're painting, that you have that confidence and freedom to just create something. Okay, I think I need to bring this together in here. Some little flowers. I'm going to use my liner brush. And spring flowers, they tend to be lots of bright colours like yellows and whites. So I'm going to go in for some really bright yellow colour. I'm going to just dot these around. See, it just kind of disappears in there, doesn't it? Really, all these little flower heads. I'm going to need a little bit more white mixed into it. I need almost to create little petals. There we go, some little flower heads. Particularly any kind of a particular sort of flower. I think that'd just be too fiddly, but if you really want to get into sort of doing some little flowers, just think of being like a little dish shape. You can add a couple of little petals at the back. So there you go. So it looks like a little flat dish. I think that's probably a bit on the big side, but hey heck, it's my painting and my world, as Bob would say, so I paint anything I like. There you go, it's another little dish shape. Do one more up in the dark. Little flat dish. A couple of small petals at the back. A little petal or 2 at the front. As long as you've got that kind of little dish shape to it, you can pretty much get away with almost painting anything in your scene. Time for the big reveal. See if I can take this off. And finally, after quite a struggle, I managed to take off the final bit of that masking tape with only one small casualty. I'll fix that up. It'll be an easy one to do. I just want to make sure this flower looks like it's growing out through the top. One final touch, I nearly forgot. I could put some little yellow faces in the middles of my flowers. Gosh, that won't do, will it? There. I just need to sign it. So there we have it. my version of a Bob Ross classic with a bit of a twist to it, of course, and all done with water mixable oils. Is this one for a beginner? Well, I think so. Definitely one to get your teeth into. Now, if you're doing New Year's resolutions, don't forget, make the first one to watch more of the videos of my channel, because that's where you'll find the beginners special paintings that I think that you should be able to do for your very first scene. In fact, there's a couple of them coming up on the screen right now. Don't forget, water mixable oils can be just as much fun as regular oils. Happy painting, people, and happy holidays.